We love some directors because of their out-of-the-box creative and daring filmmaking. But there is a line between creative vision and putting your crew in terrible danger. Today, we're going to talk about 3 films that almost killed the crew. And you're going to want to stay till the end because I'm saving the best for last. Worst for last? Whatever. Hey, I'm Mike. I studied film, I work in TV, and I love movies. First up, James Cameron's The Abyss. When an Ohio-class U.S. submarine encounters an unidentified submerged object and becomes stranded at the bottom of the Cayman Trench, the deepest point in the Caribbean, the rescue mission falls into the hands of an experimental underwater oil drilling platform captained by Ed Harris. Filming The Abyss was a punishing experience for cast and crew alike. Imagine shooting a movie, the lights, the cameras, the action, underwater. That's right, 40% of The Abyss's principal photography was shot underwater. What could possibly go wrong? To accomplish this, Cameron shot in a massive, specially adapted, abandoned nuclear reactor containment vessel in South Carolina. It took 5 days just to fill it with enough water to give the production team the 30 feet depth they needed to realistically recreate the bottom of the ocean. Cast and crew underwent rigorous dive training beforehand. After a few days of shooting, the water turned murky, and the cameras were unable to see through the cloudy water. So, they added more and more chlorine until it was clear enough to shoot through. Unfortunately, cast and crew that weren't fully covered by wetsuits suffered chlorine burns and hair loss. Communications with the submerged crew members was one way, meaning they couldn't talk back to the Oscar-winning director when they were given direction. The 20 to 40 crew members that were working underwater at any given time were forced to develop a series of hand signals to communicate with one another and with Cameron on the surface. Several of the actors nearly drowned, including Ed Harris, who had a near-death experience in the fluid breathing suit. Fun fact, liquid breathing is a real thing. That rat they submerge is actually breathing liquid. But Harris had to hold his breath in a dive suit filled with pink liquid while submerged in 30 feet of water. Talk about anxiety. In another instance, Harris had an issue with his regulator, and the safety diver assigned to him wasn't able to give him his backup regulator in time. The DP had to intervene from behind the camera and save Harris from drowning. If all this doesn't sound bad enough, the production was using a tarp to cover the tank so as not to allow sunlight to penetrate the water. They were supposed to be at the deepest point in the ocean after all, so they couldn't have sunlight peeking through. At some point during the production, the tarp ripped, and Cameron was forced to switch the already grueling schedule to nights. And then it got cold. The shoot had extended into the fall of that year, and the temperature dropped. They were shooting a movie underwater in the cold at night. The conditions on set were so bad that co-star Mary Elizabeth Mastriantonio still refuses to discuss the film to this day.
When it comes to the safety of these people, there's me and then there's God, understand?
You can't talk about dangerous crew environments without talking about Apocalypse Now. Filming the Oscar-winning movie was a notorious shit show, as documented in Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse, a documentary shot by Coppola's wife and eventually released in 1991. It chronicled the making of Coppola's epic Vietnam movie and his descent into madness, much like his fictional character, Colonel Kurtz. Filming began in Luzon, Philippines in March of 1976. The Philippines were selected because of its resemblance to Vietnam. Both have lush jungles and tropical beaches. Almost as soon as they started filming, dysentery spread through the crew. Originally, Harvey Keitel was tapped to play Willard, the lead, but after a few days, Coppola became unhappy with Keitel's take on the character and flew back to LA and recast Martin Sheen in the role. Then, 2 months into the production, they were hit by a massive storm, Typhoon Olga, which destroyed up to 80% of the sets. Trees were bent at 45-degree angles, and crew members were stranded in their hotels. Most of the crew eventually returned to LA for 8 weeks while locations and scenic departments worked to rebuild. In July, production resumed, and Marlon Brando arrived on set heavier than anyone had anticipated and had difficulty remembering his lines. Martin Sheen had a near-fatal heart attack and struggled for a quarter of a mile to reach help. He had to be airlifted to a hospital in Manila. Sheen worried that funding for the film would be halted if word of his condition got out, so he lied and said he had heat stroke. His brother, Joe Estevez, filled in for him so Coppola could continue shooting over-the-shoulder shots and shots of what was supposed to be Sheen's back. Then there were the helicopters. The helicopters they used were on loan from the Philippine government. The production had to paint them to pass as U.S. helicopters, but they were still in operational use and would get called back for actual military missions, sometimes in mid-take. The production was constantly painting and repainting the choppers. The beach scene was a nightmare to film. Timing the explosions to the flyovers became a logistical shit show. Planes would appear late, pyrotechnics would go off early. At one point, Coppola had 5 cameras running, and none of them caught the intended action. Rumors swirled that Apocalypse Now had as many as 5 different endings. Coppola kept changing the script because Brando was too fat to play the scenes as they were originally written. Apocalypse Now wrapped production on what should have been a 4-month shoot after 238 days and cost more than double the original $14 million budget, causing Coppola to experience a breakdown of his own. Coppola famously said, "We weren't making a movie, we were making war."
Don't you think it's a little risky for R&R? If I say it's safe to surf this beach, Captain, it's safe to surf this beach!
Finally, 1956's The Conqueror, starring John Wayne as Ghengis Khan.
Let 2 men guard this woman in her tent. If ill befalls her, they shall die the slow death.
Oh yeah, it's a bad movie. Unintentionally comical even. This movie was doomed from the get-go. Billionaire Howard Hughes had just purchased RKO Pictures with plans to level up the B-movie studio with an epic picture. Veteran actor Dick Powell, who was making the transition to director and needed a big credit, was given the reins. Both Marlon Brando and Yul Brynner turned down the film because of the strangely written dialogue that screenwriter Oscar Millard decided upon.
Be it fair exchange or no, she's a fair daughter, whoever she be.
So, naturally, producers approached John Wayne, America's hero cowboy, of course. Rather than work with a dialogue coach, Wayne just brought his cowboy persona to one of Mongolia's fiercest conquerors.
By night my warmth, and for adornment by day I shall heap precious stones on you and rare ornaments.
I want no more your stolen treasure than your vile warmth, Mongol.
Howard Hughes needed a location that could pass as the Gobi Desert, and decided to shoot the film in Snow Canyon, just outside of St. George, Utah. It was perfect. It was remote, it could pass as the Mongolian desert, and it was about 135 miles downwind from the U.S.'s Nevada National Testing Site where, from 1951 to 1992, nearly 1,000 nuclear bombs were detonated. At the time of the Conqueror's filming, they had detonated nearly 50 nuclear bombs, 11 just the year before. Enough to contaminate the air and the soil all around St. George. History would not look back on this era kindly. At the time, the federal government insisted to residents of St. George and executives at RKO that there was nothing to worry about. Production began in the spring of 1954, which consisted of approximately 200 people living and working on site in Snow Canyon. Some of the cast brought their families to live with them. John Wayne had his children with him. Here they are seen playing with a Geiger counter. Yeesh. And Susan Hayward had her 2 boys with her. After 4 months on location, the exteriors were completed, so they moved the production back to Los Angeles. In order to match the color of the soil in Snow Canyon, Howard Hughes insisted on shipping 60 tons of the radioactive soil back to the studio in Los Angeles. He didn't know. The hot dirt lined the floor of the hermetically sealed studio for the remainder of the production. The movie opened and critics panned the film as a farce. It's listed as one of the worst films of all time, and John Wayne posthumously received a Golden Turkey Award in the Worst Casting category. But The Conqueror's legacy didn't end there, unfortunately. In all, 91 of the 200 permanent crew, or 41% of the crew, developed cancer by 1980, and 46 of those 91 died from the disease. Among them, in 1962, director Dick Powell developed a lymphoma and died. In 1963, Mexican actor Pedro Armendariz, who had just finished filming the James Bond film From Russia with Love, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Armendariz committed suicide before the disease could consume him. Susan Hayward underwent a hysterectomy after several tumors were found on her uterus, and then more tumors were found on her vocal cords and eventually on her brain. Hayward died of brain cancer in 1975. John Wayne developed lung cancer in 1964, which he had removed, and eventually died from stomach cancer in 1979. And Agnes Moorehead, a notorious teetotaler who didn't drink or smoke, died of cancer in April of 1974. Moorehead was the first to attribute her and her castmates' illnesses with the ill-fated production. In 1980, People magazine made the connection between the Nevada testing site and the filming of The Conqueror. Their report followed up with every member of the crew and found an unusually high cancer rate as compared to the national average. The article quoted a federal spokesperson as saying, "Please God, don't let us have killed John Wayne." John Wayne, always the flag-waving patriot, deflected blaming the government by saying he and his castmates were heavy smokers in those days, before they knew smoking caused cancer. The Conqueror was one of the last films Howard Hughes ever produced. Reportedly, Hughes felt so guilty about his decision to film at a hazardous site that he bought every print of The Conqueror for $12 million and kept it out of circulation for many years until Universal Pictures purchased the film from his estate in 1979. At the end of his life, Hughes became a recluse. He would sit in his Las Vegas hotel, naked and alone, watching The Conqueror over and over and over. Well, there you have it, 3 films that almost killed its crew. And because I don't want to end on such a downer, I give you this clip from The Conqueror.
of Samarkand. I recognize her by the,
There are no finer dances under the heavens.
If you like this content and want to see more, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. Film is about community. I'm Mike, and I love movies.